So I'd like to share with you a teaching that's come to me recently, and I'm calling it the rebirth sequence, or the transition sequence, and it's about how we prepare for death. And in a way, all of life is a preparation for death. So this is for everyone, and I think it's really important at that level. But it also is a powerful teaching, I think, a contemplation for those who are literally preparing for death. It goes through 4 stages, and if you know my teachings and you know the gene keys and you know what's called the activation sequence, you'll recognize this. The first stage, and I should say actually before I launch into it, that this is, when I say rebirth and death, and I talk about these words, they're actually woven into life as well. They're woven into our everyday reality. So there are times where we are called to surrender something of ourselves, or something, where we're going through a portal, some kind of initiation, some kind of big change. It might be someone else's death, it might be a crisis, it might be many things, that we are having to move through a major change in our lives, and indeed the whole planet. So it's very applicable to everyone. And the first stage, which relates to our life's work, what we're here to do, is about closure, compassionate closure. So you can look at your sequence, and you can look at your life's work, and if you get your Gene Keys profile, you'll see that there's a gene key relating to that. There's a code, an archetype that's specific to you. And depending on what the nature of your life's work is, you come to a stage where it's time to bring it to an end. And when our life's work ends, then we leave. I mean, that's the nature of what we are here for. As soon as we've finished our work, we move on. And that's the same with many things. So compassionate closure is about realize, before you leave, before you make the grand transition, you really think about others, and you think about those you're leaving behind and what you're leaving behind, and that you do the things necessary to make it as easy for them as possible. That's bringing things to a compassionate close. Instead of thinking of yourself, which obviously you're going to, the first thing you do is you think about, what am I leaving behind on the surface? How can I make it as easy as possible for those who I leave behind? And you spend some time with that question. And this could be in anything, the end of a relationship, same thing. You look at, well, how can I bring this to a close in a gracious, graceful way that leaves a really good feeling inside me, at least, that I have done my absolute utmost to be of service to the situation and to anyone else who's involved in it, maybe your partner, if it's a close of a relationship. You bring it to a compassionate closure. And that's not always possible. So sometimes, because you don't know how the other person is feeling, or how, the situation is really, there might be a lot of discomfort or pain. So you have to do it for yourself. Really, you have to do it inside yourself sometimes. And just make sure that you have done all the external things that you need, so that in a way you've kind of just you've finished with it for your, in the best way possible. In the best way possible, as much as you possibly can, thinking of others, thinking of those who are going to be affected. So you've got to think of all the practicalities. Compassionate closure is about practicalities. And that's the first stage of the sequence. And it leads to the next stage. And the next stage is legacy, your karmic legacy. In the Gene Keys, in the profile, it relates to what's called your radiance, which is rather lovely because in a way, your karmic legacy is what radiates out behind you after you've gone. Think about that. Think about these things, think about even with your life's work, even if you've had a life where you haven't really lived that because of whatever reason, it's been a life of struggle and you feel like you haven't done what you really could have done, then at the very end, bring it to a gracious close, because you can do so much at the end. You can actually, it's why the ancients say that the way we die can actually propel us forward in evolution, even if we've had a very difficult life, even if we've had a kind of a selfish life, let's say, that people can make huge advances spiritually at the end because there's so much potential for transformation at the end. So think about that. And your karmic legacy is how you end, is how you bring things to a close. So if you can do it all on the surface and in a compassionate way, that's wonderful. But then there's also what you've left behind. That your real karmic legacy is, our radiance is like everything we've ever said, everything we've ever done, and our whole entire presence. So your legacy is not only like the work you might leave behind or some nice things, or maybe you're like me, you're a writer, you left a good book or two. It's really the joy that you have created in others, in their hearts, through the words that you've spoken, through all the good things you've done in your life. And even though we might look back and go, well, I could have done a lot more good things, your karmic legacy is like, how much goodness can I leave behind me at the end? How many things can I do? What can I, it's not just what can I give away on the surface. It's like, what's the most I can really give of my spirit at the end? It might be simple as like asking someone for forgiveness or forgiving someone for something they did. And that doesn't even have to be done formally. It can be done in your heart. Because the radiance is something that is magical. And this pathway is the pathway of magic. The pathway of magic is like you can't see your karmic legacy. You might get a sense of it at your own funeral, because you will hear what people say and you will feel the feeling inside people's hearts as they remember you. But essentially, your karmic legacy is something magical. As I said, it's created out of all the good words, good deeds, and things you've said and done throughout your life. And so it's an emanation that spreads throughout the cosmos, throughout the universe. Every act we make, it has a frequency embedded in it. Every word and tone we use has a frequency embedded in it. And they live eternally. Our acts live in eternity. It's quite something to consider. What is your karmic legacy? And even if you're young and you're in the beginning of your life, really consider this. Like you can build an incredible radiant field, through your life, through how you live, through how you speak, through how you think. The thoughts you have, are they kind? Are they forgiving? Are they, are you able to yield to life's initiations? Or are you stubborn and, like that? Will you grow? Will you learn? How much can you grow and learn and soften and be kind? You know, how much benevolence can you emanate during the course of one life? How much benevolence can you emanate during the course of 1 hour? You know, so really consider every act as a sacred act. That is the foundation of the magical universe. Every act is a sacred act. It lives in eternity. Every word is a sacred word. It vibrates in eternity. This is the whole nature of karma, you know, the karma that we leave behind, karmic legacy. That's the second stage of the sequence. The third stage, you know, after the karma has begun to emanate out into the cosmos and we've placed our crowning glory at the end, whatever it is, the act or the words that we've spoken or the things we've left behind, then becomes the third stage is the dissolution of the ego. You know, and this is what happens particularly when, you know, it's what happens particularly as we approach death, is it begins to happen automatically. Our identity begins to detach from the vehicle that it's housed in, you know, our attachment to the form, and it happens automatically. And, you know, the same way we come in through a 9-month sequence, we leave through a 9-month sequence, whether we're aware of that or not. So we leave, you know, that's quite a mystery. So the detaching of the ego, the dissolution of the ego relates to our evolution. And this is a very magical, extraordinary thing because we have to surrender. So this is the pathway of surrender. And, you know, many people can fight. It's like, you know, every time there's a major transition in our lives, an initiation of some form, what we're really called upon is to sacrifice the, you know, to surrender the ego, to surrender our individual viewpoint, our attachment to the outcome, to how we want it to look like, and just yield to a force that is greater than us, of which we are also a part. And so this is the ending, in a way, the final. It's not the ending of our evolution, but it's the shifting of our evolution to another plane. So it's the closure of our, you know, of our external physical evolution in this life. You know, so the dissolution of the ego is a magical event, and any transition can bring this. You know, you will be called upon to surrender your position in some way and allow your ego to dissolve. And so that can be a little bit, or it can be right at the end where you dissolve, the whole thing dissolves, all of it. The false identity that believes it's separate and believes it is this body or this name, this separate being. This is a process that everyone who's dying at some level goes through, because it's the process that's engaged in our brain and in our being as we're dying. So it's a process that involves profound surrender. Profound surrender. But also think about it in any transition that you're moving through in your life. You know, it's the same grain of truth. You're invited to surrender some deep aspect of your identification to something. As you let go, you find more and more freedom. And it's a journey. This is a journey. Surrender is a journey in layers. And it hurts, especially at the beginning, it hurts. But then as we deepen our surrender and our ego lets go, it becomes so sweet. It becomes almost blissful, you know, as we surrender. And we surrender into the final stage, the fourth stage. And the fourth stage is the stage that brings us meaning. This is the pathway of meaning. And it's the final meaning of our lives, in a way, the deeper meaning, the purpose of our lives. And it's what we're surrendering into. We're surrendering into the arms of the beloved, or the arms of the mother's embrace. The mother is the divine emptiness at the heart of all things, the void, but it's not the empty void, it's the loving void, it's the mother's embrace. We become one with the mother's embrace. So we have to surrender everything and just drop and fall into the arms of that mystery at the core of life. Everyone who's dying, that's where they go. We fall into this aching, beautiful, endless, eternal mystery. Some call it God, the divine mother. And I call it the divine mother here because it's the essence of tenderness and love. That's what we feel, that's what we experience, that's what we know and remember as we surrender and dissolve. That's what meets us. It's the mother's embrace. It's such a mystery, such a fathomless mystery. As we sacrifice, we make the final sacrifice. And in giving up our identity, we receive all the gifts. We become one with the great one, the self, the true self. All the names that the mystics have given to that. And this is the final letting go into the mother. And obviously, at some other level, whether you subscribe to this view or not, it is also a recycling and a renewal. Every death is a rebirth. This is why I call this the rebirth sequence. So we're either reborn in another dimension, an eternal dimension, or we're reborn here again on this planet Gaia. And we have a trajectory that we follow. And our rebirth brings us literally into the arms and the womb of another mother. However long that sequence takes, a bardo sequence they call it. The mysteries, this is like a lot of letting go in this sequence. And the stages are very clear, each step. And then eventually we come into another womb. And we're reborn in another life, But we carry with us this same, legacy. What we left in one life, the reverberations of it imprint the next life. And that's an amazing, beautiful teaching. And if we've completed entirely, which is a rare thing on this plane, then when we surrender and the ego dissolves, we surrender into a higher dimension. That's an even greater mystery, because there comes a time when our business, even here, is finished, and we enter into a wider life, wider than we can possibly imagine or put into words. So these are beautiful things to consider, and obviously one of the things that we are going to experience in this process is letting go of layers of fear. And that's what this sequence is here to do. We consider it now, and we realize that it's actually, even as we are growing and evolving, we're also dying. So we are moving towards death all the time, and this is not a negative thing. Like we are being asked to surrender every day deeper and deeper into the mystery of life. So this sequence, which is in a way a reverse sequence of the one I call activation, which is the one that evolving, this is an involving sequence because it involves us at the deepest level in creation. as we learn to surrender more and more deeply to all that is and to the perfection of the sequence itself. To trust in every stage of our life journey, even the very final stages. And these are things that we can really take deeply into contemplation and consider. If you're near the end of your life and you're considering these things, then really consider what your legacy is and how to close things, with grace, so that you can make this beautiful journey, dropping layers of fear and desire and identification as you surrender into the arms of the Mother.